Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Stewart McLaurin of the White House Historical Association.
Well, good morning, everyone. I'm excited to be with you today and to welcome our very distinguished panel to talk about cultural diplomacy and to tell you one very exciting and wonderful story. Joining me today are His Excellency Philippe Etienne, the Ambassador of France to the United States, Bénédicte de Montlaur, the President and CEO of the World Monuments Fund, and Kaywin Feldman, the Director of the National Gallery of Art in Washington, D.C. And I've had the privilege to work with each of these wonderful leaders, and we could spend all afternoon just with each of them talking about the great work they've done in cultural diplomacy. But to set the stage for our conversation this morning, I want to take you back to 1961. First Lady Jacqueline Kennedy has just become First Lady of the United States. She's 31 years old. She's First Lady for less than 3 years through the tragic death of her husband. But she accomplished some significant and wonderful things during that time that still impact our country and the White House today. In fact, diplomacy or cultural diplomacy in the world today. I want to take you just through a quick little road trip, if I can, on the talking about the Mona Lisa. In 1961, Mrs. Kennedy and President Kennedy went on this iconic trip to Paris, and President Kennedy was famously quoted as saying, "I had the pleasure of accompanying First Lady Jacqueline Kennedy to Paris, and I enjoyed it." She took the town by storm. She was a lover of all things French and France, as you know, Ambassador. And she and French Cultural Affairs Minister André Malraux undertook or hatched this scheme that they would bring the Mona Lisa to the United States, perhaps to the chagrin of President de Gaulle and President Kennedy, given the risks, but nothing would deter Mrs. Kennedy from this ambitious goal. So the Mona Lisa was packaged in this crate. She was bolted into a stateroom, a VIP stateroom aboard the SSS France. She made the transatlantic journey. The world of the eyes of the governments in America and in France were on this journey. It was kept secret from the people on board. In fact, it became so controversial that the people thought there was some sort of nuclear secret or something that was being kept from them. And finally, it was revealed that it was the Mona Lisa. She arrived in New York to fanfare and jubilation. She was put in this caravan that took her from New York down to the National Gallery of Art in Washington. And I love the picture in the lower right. Typically American, the caravan stops along the way to have a hot dog with the Mona Lisa on their way to Washington. And then it arrives and it is displayed for, at first, at the National Gallery of Art, where 500,000 people lined up to see this extraordinary work. Families, grandparents with grandchildren, school classrooms came. And then in New York, at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, over 1 million lined up down Fifth Avenue for this extraordinary exhibit. And she was returned to France in March. And so in this whirlwind trip, Jackie Kennedy had brought the Mona Lisa to the United States in cooperation with the French government, and it was a huge success in cultural diplomacy and in exchange in that day. But let's talk about today and use this story. Ambassador, you've been very involved in cultural affairs and exchanges. Tell us about what this would have been like at the time to undertake this. Are things like this possible today, or perhaps things like this are underway today?
Well, thank you very much. It's a great story. And it is not a coincidence that the main French actor of this was André Malraux, the Minister of Culture, because he was not only a great first Minister of Culture, but he also was a writer, a great writer. And Jackie Kennedy admired his books. He's a good example, maybe the best, of what culture means for our country and cultural exchange. So I don't know whether such operations would be easy or possible today, but yes, and we have here Kaywin, she knows better than me. The exchanges between museums remain extremely important for the relations between our countries, the exhibitions you organize with your French counterparts. You have in the American Museum extraordinary collections of French painting, as you know, and we, as diplomats, we try to support this, and I have been doing this in all my career. It remains one of the DNA of the French diplomacy. It has been a long time a main priority of our diplomacy to sustain, to support this cultural exchange, and I can give you a number of examples from my experience.
Right.
Well, Mr. Ambassador, you could make history today by offering to send us the Mona Lisa again here in this.
Here we go.
We had Jackie, we had André Malraux, we had Presidents Kennedy and de Gaulle.
Yes.
And I'm sure you have had, and you will send also very, very beautiful paintings in the next exhibitions. Yeah. But just to give you an example, with Leonardo da Vinci, we commemorated in 2019 the 5th centenary of his death in Amboise. I was there in charge of European relations. I can tell you that it played a role in the reconciliation between France and Italy, because we had a small dispute just before, and the Italian president came to Amboise, and this history of this extraordinary man, much more than an artist, by the way, served also for our relations today with, between the two countries.
Wow. Well, Kaywin, your museum has a marvelous collection, and you do exchanges with other museums and galleries around the world. Something of this magnitude, could it be undertaken today, and would it generate the education interest with young people and the passion among families to come and actually see? We're used to looking at things on a little screen, but to generate that number of people and that interest to come and see it in person, is that possible today?
You ask a great question and a complex one. And I'd start by saying actually that I never worry that anybody ever is going to think that the little screen replaces what happens when you stand in front of an original work of art. I think that will forever remain very special. And the answer is sort of yes and no. I think in this case, the Mona Lisa was such an extraordinary loan. It is one of the most famous works of art. It's sort of like the Kardashians today. She's famous for being famous.
Oh no.
And
that's the quote of the whole panel. Mona Lisa is like the Kardashians.
But the work of art is just so well known. So, for example, the National Gallery has recently loaned our painting by Raphael of the Alba Madonna to both Rome and to London. It is on the same level of the Mona Lisa in terms of importance, quality, excellence. It's just not as famous. So I don't think you would get queues around the blocks for many works of art, except for a handful that are in the sort of league of fame of the Mona Lisa. And then the other thing that's changed is this extraordinary collaboration that happened in 1963 was actually the beginning, the very first beginning of the idea of blockbusters and people lining up for hours for culture. And it was carried on in the 1970s by both the directors of the Met and the National Gallery. And with the King Tut exhibition, blockbusters, sort of swarmed everywhere. And 50 years have passed, and so now people travel, they see works of art, we bring works of art. So the idea of those sort of singular moments, I think it has changed, but the idea of the importance of cultural exchange and global museums lending their collections, it really is extraordinary. And if all of you could see the list of works of art each year, just at the National Gallery, forget all the other museums in America, lend to our sister institutions around the world. It's a really concerted effort that a lot of people devote time and money and resources to make happen. It's really extraordinary.
Wow. Well, Bénédicte, you have a background in the French Foreign Ministry with cultural affairs, but in your role now with the World Monuments Fund, an extraordinary collection of sites in communities around the world. What is your perspective on, historically, what did Minister Montlaur go through to make this happen? What would the hurdles have been? And would the hurdles be the same today if we were to undertake something like this?
So I think if it's for a painting at that level, the answer is yes. For instance, previously, as you said, I was a cultural counselor for the French embassy in the United States, very briefly with Ambassador Etienne. And there were sometimes talk of bringing some very, very exceptional works of art. I remember once there was some talk about Olympia by Manet, which is at the Orsay Museum, but that is impossible to get out of France. So, and for very good reasons. You know, if you've read the book, which I highly recommend, you will see that there were many reasons why there was so much opposition for the Mona Lisa to come to the US because of conservation issues, humidity issues, and security issues. It was impossible to insure, to get an insurance for the Mona Lisa because it's most expensive work of art. So I think today, for a painting of that level, like the Olympia of Manet, of course, would have been great at a show like the Black Model, that was both at the Orsay and at the Wallach Art Center of Columbia. But that would have required, I think, an involvement at a very high political level, because without that, it is a job of museum directors and conservators to take care of the works of art and not to take this type of risk. So I think for certain works of art, the answer is yes. You would necessitate the same level of political involvement to make it happen. But that being said, I was very interested by what you said, that this moment in the 60s was really the beginning of this cultural exchange, cultural diplomacy, and World Monuments Fund, where I work today, has been created also at that moment, when I think, even though the word was not crafted yet, it was really the emergence of the idea of soft power. We saw with this exchange with this coming of the Mona Lisa to the US, how big an impact it can have on the relationship between two countries. And so I think at that time, everybody saw that in our field, which is cultural heritage preservation, you could really develop mutual understanding, strong links between people and communities around the globe by working together on culture, and make a very important difference that goes beyond the symbol. For instance, we work a lot in Cambodia. That, and we've been there for 30 years. That was so important after the fall of the Khmer Rouge to have many countries, France, of course, but the US. A lot of our work at World Monuments Fund is funded by the State Department, investing to really rebuild a generation of curators and take this site of, which is so extraordinary, of Angkor, and bring tourists, bring the economy back, and facilitate exchange between people. And I think this involvement in cultural diplomacy made a difference in the reconstruction of the country after the fall of the Khmer Rouge. So today, the political involvement in cultural diplomacy is really important too. We are seeing it today in Ukraine. I'm going to stop here.
Well, the Ukraine point is very important. Let's talk about arts education. In our country, arts, humanities, history education are waning in the schools, and therefore interest among adults perhaps is as well. Ambassador, how can we change this globally and reinvigorate interest in the arts and culture and history at a younger level that would benefit the world as these young people grow up?
I think it is, by the way, one of our priorities. We have to continue on the side of France, because it has always been the case, but also to adapt this priority, cultural priority in our diplomacy. It is the reason why we have launched this new program, which is a new way of organizing artist residence, which is called Villa Albertine, which will make the program, will give a great place to museums. We will organize next year a new forum on museums. There are already many connections between American and French museums, as we said. But we will, for instance, try to give a voice to women, director of museums, because there are great examples here in the US, but also more and more, actually a majority in France. And we want also to help educate a more diverse population of young French people who will be the next generation of curators, of museum directors, to generate new exchanges, which again, as Kaywin said, will also be very, very concrete, focused on the works of arts, but will also use completely the new possibilities So this is our contribution, but the institutions also are really active, and there is, for instance, this fantastic project of Centre Pompidou in Jersey City, quite close to this place. And I could mention many, many examples where you see a very vibrant development around arts and culture as an essential part of the next steps of our diplomacy and international relations.
Well, Kaywin and Bénédicte, let's talk about this Next Gen theme. We have several of our White House Historical Association Next Gen leaders here with us today. They inspire me more than anything that we do. And how do we engage that group, those future leaders, current and future leaders, in arts and culture and embracing this no matter what their field may be? Kaywin?
Well, I would build on what the ambassador said also of, I think art has always been important to people, going back to cave paintings to today. So I don't worry about the importance of arts. It's on us as institutions to do a better job of reaching and communicating and communicating the relevance of the collections and the works of art that we have, and engaging people of all ages. Museums in America do programs for little babies in the galleries up to senior citizens, and it's allowing everybody to find their way in. And you mentioned the sort of next gen leaders, and getting them involved in their local museums and cultural institutions is of great and urgent importance, and I think institutions are doing it around the country. And since this might be the last chance I have the mic, I also want to note that the National Gallery of Art in Washington has the only painting by Leonardo da Vinci in the Americas. So any of you Da Vinci fans out there, please come to Washington to see the portrait of Ginevra da Benci at the National Gallery.
Bénédicte, Next Generation.
Thank you. I think everybody cares, in particular for cultural heritage, but people take it for granted. And this is a problem, but we see that the minute it is at risk, like we remember the Buddha of Bamiyan, Notre Dame, the Temple of Baal in Syria, the minute it is at risk, everybody realizes what a drama it is. So I think the idea here is to engage with the topics that matter to this young generation, to show how relevant art and, in our case, cultural heritage is. So for instance, I was talking about Ukraine. You know, in Ukraine, it's a lot about history, identity that is at risk. You can see the emotion of people. Of course, they want to defend themselves. The humanitarian needs are first, but then comes just after that the protection of their culture, their cultural heritage. So that's why immediately we created a program to help cultural heritage professionals there. And this cannot be more relevant. You know that people in Ukraine care, and therefore everybody else care. But also through culture, you can engage in other topics that are top priority, like climate change, water management. At the moment, we are engaged in preserving traditional water management system in India, in Peru, in Nepal, and those are crucial. It's not only beautiful, extraordinary architectural structures, but those are places that provide clean water to people if we rehabilitate them. So I think it's all about showing why culture is relevant, how it interconnects with what people care about today.
That's right. Ambassador, let's close with you. We've talked about the next generation and the future leaders, but let's talk about our leaders today. How, with all the issues they're wrestling with around the world and in their portfolios and on their desks, how can we get them to engage more in culture and the arts as a way to bridge economic and cultural divides across the world today?
I think it is indeed really important, both in terms of peace and mutual trust, to build and to rely on those bridges, which are powerful bridges between the peoples, but also in terms of economic consequences, jobs and value. So I think this is, as I said, a very, very important feature of our diplomacy. I'm sure that as far as France is concerned, it will remain one of our priorities, and we'll do our best, both inside the European Union, where we have developed those programs, but also with the United States and with other countries all over the world, even the countries which are different from us, and maybe because there are those differences, as you implied in your question, it is really important now in this world because like Bénédicte recalled with Ukraine, we have a world which needs more and more this element in our relations.
Well, maybe we could begin with President Macron and President Biden having some sort of engagement on this. I know Dr. Biden will be here this afternoon, and the White House Historical Association, we've been privileged to work with every president and first lady since Mrs. Kennedy in 1961. Our role is exactly the same with each one, and the White House itself has an extraordinary collection of art, and perhaps some of that might enter into this equation in the future. The book that we've been talking about today is Mona Lisa in Camelot. The author is Margaret Leslie Davis. It's published by the White House Historical Association, and at 11 o'clock today, when the bookstore reopens, we have a copy of this for everyone if you've not picked up one already. History, cultural education, and diplomacy is important for all of us. No matter what your field is, whether it's technology, medicine, business, it's important not only to know the history of our culture and the world and our country, but of your business and of your field, and to realize that your success today, no matter what you do, is built upon the history and the learnings, successes and failures of all of those in your field that have gone before you. So their story is very important. Your story is very important. And thank you to our three leaders today. Your work is very important to cultural diplomacy and for all that we're talking about today. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you.